Today we will talk about what was good in the Galactic Empire, and why so many love it with all their heart and soul, while some despise it. Was there anything good there? Of course there was, and a lot of it, because it's not for nothing that billions of volunteers joined the Imperial Armed Forces and served on civilian posts, serving faithfully and truthfully. And there were plenty of supporters of the Empire among ordinary people, from the proletariat to merchants. Where does the negative image of the Galactic Empire come from? The thing is, the vast majority of novels, stories, games, and comics are rebellious, so to speak, and speak ill of the Empire. These works show us the most unsightly sides of the Empire which indeed existed. Yes, this state committed acts of genocide, war crimes, and oppression of certain races and peoples, rudely interfering in their internal affairs. Usually these aspects of the Empire are the focus of the viewer, player, or reader. But these were mainly exceptions to the rule, not the general trend. Finding the positive sides of the galactic megastate is not as difficult as it might seem at first glance. Thoroughly crafting the mythology of the Star Wars universe, the authors created many fascinating events, many of which do honor the Empire, thus forming a coherent, multifaceted image of the gigantic state. We will briefly talk about some of the Empire's merits. Why briefly? There are countless positive aspects of the state created by Palpatine. It is not worth listing them all. Firstly, it would take a long time, and secondly, enough focus should be placed on specific moments that can form a general picture. The Galactic Empire was held not only by the faceless, scary warriors in white armor, and not only by the guns of Star Destroyers. One of the most significant achievements of the Galactic Empire was the relative stability and order in the socio-political life of the galaxy. Yes, stability and order, as strange as it might sound. Only the Rebel Alliance, formed in the second year before the Battle of Yavin, managed to shake this balance. After the end of the Clone Wars and the formation of the Empire, the first thing the Emperor did was to deal with the remnants of the Confederacy of Independent Systems, which, after the end of the war, did not deign to lay down their arms and caused all sorts of chaos. Simultaneously, a large-scale campaign began to eradicate piracy, smuggling, and other criminal activities, which had proliferated during the semi-anarchic rule of the Republic. In the late Republican period, some pirate leaders had entire fleets and could put planetary governments on the spot, or even an entire star system. In those years, the entire Galactic Republic was unsafe. Even in the core worlds, pirates could launch audacious attacks on massive convoys of cargo ships, or even land on a planet for large-scale looting and capturing prisoners to sell them into slavery later. In the absence of an armed force within the Republic and the inertia of the Senate, which could not mobilize the surrounding systems to repel the pirates, highwaymen could and did operate virtually with impunity. The freebooting came to an end after the conclusion of the Clone Wars. The newly formed Imperial Fleet, the successor of the Grand Army of the Republic's fleet, had gained colossal experience during the war, was large, well-equipped and structured, and rolled over the galaxy like a steamroller. Palpatine, for obvious reasons, did not stop this force immediately after the war. First, large pirate flotillas were defeated. Then, numerous dissenters who created chaos in their own ways followed. Some of them had recently fought on the side of the Separatists. To understand how badly pirates fared under the Empire, I recommend referencing the handbook Pirates and Privateers, for example, checking pages 84, 86. As the title suggests, this book is entirely devoted to pirates. It explicitly states that the number of pirates vastly decreased during the Imperial period. Only with the emergence of the Rebel Alliance, which often collaborated with pirates, supplying them with weapons and tips on valuable cargo, did the pirate problem become relevant again. The Imperial fleet had to simultaneously combat both pirates and rebels. However, it is worth noting that most Imperials did not distinguish between the two, as both pirates and rebels were de jure and de facto non-lawful armed forces, large criminal organizations, and sometimes operated using similar methods. How exactly the so-called noble rebels became friendly with pirates and other criminals can be read in the Rebellion-era sourcebook, page 65. Yet until the decline of the active phase of the Galactic Civil War, that is, until the 12th year after the Battle of Yavin, pirates did not pose a serious threat to commercial shipping. Similar information can also be gleaned from the encyclopedia, The Essential Guide to Planets and Moons, which discusses the Vergesso asteroid field. The Imperial fleet cleared out the disguised pirates' ship there relatively late, as recently as the third year after the Battle of Yavin, but it was allowed to exist for a time only because through Vergesso it was possible to control local crime, obtain valuable intelligence, and infiltrate spies into the ranks of the rebels. A striking example of how the life of a large pirate group came to an end during the Imperial period is provided by another reference source, Galaxy Guide, number 9, pages 59-60. There, an enormous pirate gang known as Aitir Min Bativ, numbering over 8,000 pirates, 70 fighters, 50 armed lightships, and 28 corvettes, in addition to a massive planetary base that more resembled a fortress city with a full-fledged spaceport, decided to attempt preying on the ships of private transporters within the territory of the Empire, something they had previously feared to do. The Imperial fleet reacted instantly, dispatching a small naval formation consisting of 2 Victory-class star destroyers to visit the pirates. As a result, after a brief space battle and a ground assault, out of more than 8,000 pirates, only 275 cutthroats survived, and nearly all pirate ships were destroyed. After this, the remaining survivors posed no significant threat. This is just one of many examples of the relentless fight of the Imperials against piracy in order to establish peace and order in the galaxy. Enumerating all known instances of Imperial combat against crime would take a lifetime. Lastly, it is worth mentioning that it was during Palpatine's rule that the largest criminal syndicates in the galaxy were destroyed, such as Tenlos or the legendary Black Sun, which the Old Republic could not handle for over 3.5 millennia. However, the Black Sun faded only briefly. It was soon revived thanks to the New Republic. Yes, initially there was yet another problem for the young galactic state: the actual absence of Coruscant's control over the worlds of the Outer and Mid-Rim. It took merely a few years to establish Imperial authority in the peripheral worlds, bring planets to uniform legal standards, and secure trade routes. This allowed the stabilization of the economic system of the periphery and enabled production from these planets to enter the overall galactic market. Consequently, economic prosperity occurred. Speaking of the economy, the Galactic Republic heavily depended on financial magnates who financed its economy, with the main creditor being the banking clan, which also was a founding member of the Confederacy of Independent Systems along with other smaller organizations. The Emperor eradicated financial dependency and rid himself of creditors, coercing bankers into cooperation, thereby substantially strengthening the position of the imperial credit, which now became the universal galactic currency. Simultaneously, it managed to push back the positions of another widespread currency in the galaxy, the Hutt Pegates. Speaking of the Hutts, the Empire was so harsh that it even managed to force the Hutts to pay taxes and report to imperial tax collectors, something the Republic's Senate could not even dream of. This is discussed, for example, in the third part of the trilogy about the adventures of Han Solo. The book is called Rebel Dawn. Of course, the influence of the Empire did not end there. Palpatine managed to firmly integrate even the corporate sector into his own economy, whose businessmen were always self-centered and traditionally sent Republic tax collectors packing with elaborate and obscene expressions accompanied by well-known gestures. The corporate sector annually contributed 3% of its revenues to the imperial economy and handed over 9% of finished products free of charge, in addition to 20% of the raw materials extracted. Now let's talk about racism, xenophobia, and other standard accusations against the Empire. Perhaps for beginner fans who have recently become captivated by the Star Wars universe, this will be big news. Racism in the Empire did exist, but it was not all-encompassing and did not affect all non-human races without exception. Moreover, some representatives of non-human races held very high positions in the Empire. Thrawn was not the only non-human on Imperial service, of course. For instance, the Carradine male warlord named Fergan managed an important Imperial military academy on Karita, de facto being an Imperial Moff. The Umbaran Sly Moore was a trusted confidant of Palpatine even during the Republic, as was the Chagrian Masameda. During the Imperial period, the influence of this pair significantly increased. Grand Admiral Daneto Pitta had Bornek ancestry, and a Ferreira named Hethrir headed the imperial justice system. Additionally, one could recall the imperial inquisitors, where every second one was not human. But these are individual examples, so let's move on to the general. Our attention to this topic is not accidental, as it is racism that is traditionally criticized in the Empire by everyone who engages in debates about whether the Empire or the Alliance is better. Let's start with a race conceived for the galaxy far, far away a long time ago. Specifically in 1982. We're talking about the Serp race. This race first appeared in Star Wars in Marvel Comic Series number 64, in an issue titled Serphidian Eyes. Since then, this race has firmly established itself in the mythology of the beloved fictional universe. Serps are intelligent humanoid reptiles residing on the planet Serpid in the Belial system, in the Sanbra sector. In 1917, before the Battle of Yavin and still before the beginning of the Galactic Civil War, King Sasha came to power on Serpid, establishing close contacts with the nascent Galactic Empire. A cooperation agreement soon followed. In alliance with the powerful state, the king revived many ancient forgotten technologies of his race. Specifically, shipbuilding, engine construction, machine building, blaster weaponry reappeared, and various electromechanical household amenities familiar to a civilized galactic society. Skyscraper, multi-level homes, and some rudiments of modern industry began to appear on the planet. Before the coronation of Shah, high technology was forbidden in Serp society, as it was believed to provoke internal conflicts. The result of the voluntary renunciation of high technology in the past led to the regression of the race to the level of Earth's medieval period. Swords, armor, jesters, stone castles, and knightly cavalry were abundant. Possibly Sasha would have ruled for a long and happy period if the rebel agents had not arrived on the planet, together with Luke Skywalker. The Rebel Alliance was greatly concerned with the Empire's activity in the Sanbra sector, where the rebels had neither loyal races nor allied states, which speaks volumes. The rebels were also searching for a place to establish their secret military base. The rebels assisted a radical group of Serp's traditionalists in staging a coup to overthrow the king. Of course, the admiration and affection of some non-human races in the Empire were not limited to the Serps. It was the Empire that introduced the so-called species preservation zones, areas resembling cosmic sanctuaries aimed at preserving endangered races. An example of such a sanctuary is the planet Daror in the Jospro sector. On this planet resided the race of Ridar, intelligent winged monkeys. It was solely through imperial intervention that the race was saved from extinction and, evidently, brought to a higher technological level. You can read about this in Galaxy Guide number 4. There are also mentions in the cult, ancient, very ancient game, Star Wars Rebellion, whose pedestal is now taken by another old game, Empire at War. Let's proceed. During the time of the Old Republic, the Senate ignored the world of Rayflor and the problems of the Advos race that lived there. The imperial sector government aided the race with technology, specialists, and materials. As a result, millions of Advotse were saved. An interesting fact is that this race voluntarily petitioned to join the Empire for 3 reasons. Firstly, the Advos were attracted by the stability and order that the Empire embodied. Secondly, by joining the Empire, the race gained many opportunities to market their goods on the intergalactic market. And thirdly, by becoming part of the Empire, the Advos gained access to technologies and materials they could only dream of before. A brief topic of this race is revealed in Galaxy Guide number 12, on page 11. Furthermore, the text in this same guide contains a mention of another interesting event known as the Reslian Purge. This was an act of genocide orchestrated by the Lortan fanatics. It was solely due to the intervention of the Imperial Fleet Squadron that the Tunroth race was saved from extermination. Palpatine, wisely reasoning that it was simpler and more advantageous to befriend some races, rather than attempt to occupy them, granted many of them considerable autonomy, which implied the complete absence of Imperial troops on their territories. In another version, it was implied that only a small contingent and a limited Imperial administration were present, not interfering with the preservation of existing local orders and customs. The Imperial governor on such planets often acted merely as an observer and advisor to the local government. An example of such autonomy can be the planet Batawui, the home of the well-known race of Bothans. The Bothans were granted wide autonomy with the right to a nearly independent foreign policy and no restrictions on economic relations with other worlds. There were no imperial troops in the entire Bothawi system, except for patrol ships ensuring the safety of navigation and the protection of the imperial consulate, where only 300 stormtroopers were stationed in boredom. Moreover, the Bothans had their own armed forces. The planet was covered by its own planetary shield and means of anti-space defense, and the Bothan army was sufficiently numerous and armed with modern weapons. This in particular can be read in the Shadows of the Empire Planets Guide, pages 49-55. As you can see, not all planets in the Empire were strictly subjected to central authority. Autonomy could be obtained not only by non-human races, but also by planets predominantly inhabited by humans. For example, full autonomy within the Empire could be boasted by Alderaan. Yes, that Alderaan. There was no imperial bureaucratic apparatus on this planet, nor a single soldier. However, in this case, granting autonomy to Alderaan backfired on the Empire. Bail Organa regularly supplied the rebels with information, money, and equipment, and additionally placed a training base for Alliance militants on his territory. We all know how Alderaan ended up. It is important to note that the Emperor often did not interfere in the internal affairs of pro-imperial worlds. This is explicitly stated in the Imperial Sourcebook, page 9, and is also mentioned in the Force Unleashed Compiling Guide on page 169. Only on 1 out of 80 planets did the Empire change the political and social structure, while the rest lived as before, provided they did not attempt to harm the Empire and did not cause troubles, of course. And this was reasonable, as there are millions of colonized planets in the galaxy, where their own traditions and culture, including political culture, had long since taken shape. Let's return to the races for a moment. To date, we have managed to find 29 loyal non-human races to the Empire, some of which, such as the Eilon, were even ready to fight on the side of the Empire, though only as mercenaries and with certain reservations. There were also dozens of other races that viewed the Empire with caution, as they did any outsiders, but did not suffer from it. Of course, there were also races like the Mon Calamari and the Wookiees, who suffered considerably from the Empire. Although the furry giants were often themselves to blame for the special treatment from the Galactic Empire, in their time, they displayed acts of aggression against the Empire, or like the Mon Calamari, failed to adapt to the changing political realities, unlike the Quarren, their planetary neighbors, whom the Empire left untouched and unharmed. With rare exceptions, the situation on the planet Gassarian, inhabited by the race of the same name, was very interesting. To gain complete control over the planet and the entire planetary system, the Empire did not need to deploy troops, bomb the local natives, or commit any other deeds typical of true democratizers. The Empire was clearly not going to sit in the system with bayonets. Governor Ulbrecht Gostek managed to find something to offer the local population, and by displaying considerable diplomacy, he was able to earn the respect of the Gassarians. The local imperial administration consisted of only 12 clocks and 24 soldiers guarding the embassies from the local beasts. On one of Gassarian's moons, called Tempeh, a small military base with beacons and antennas for monitoring navigation was built. Several more small detachments of soldiers guarded the mines from aggressive fauna, for which the Gassarites were very grateful to the Imperials. Thus, the Imperial presence throughout the entire star system was limited to just 200 people. Meanwhile, Gassarian alone had a population of 27 million Gassarites. It is easy to guess how easily the natives would have dealt with the Imperials if they had considered them oppressors and occupiers. The Gassarites were a good-natured and creative people, but alas careless and not prone to self-organization. For this reason they held imperial laws in high esteem. The natives had their own government, with the imperial governor serving merely as an advisor, not directly interfering in the race's affairs. The Gassarites, impressed by the education, tact, and intellect of the imperial governor, even gave him the title of Gatir Grosinga, which in literal translation from their language means leader of the artists, the most respected person on the planet. More details about this can be read in the second volume of the encyclopedia, Planets of the Galaxy. In the same source, you can find a description of the relationships between the Imperials and the race of Zolosians, who lived on the planet Zelos II. Close and friendly relations were established with them by the Imperial General Galeros Nul, appointed as the system's governor. Galeros was a charismatic, highly educated and talented military leader and politician. However, in this case, the Zolosians, who practically never left their home planet, respected not the empire itself, but Galeros personally and his subordinates. They had not heard of other aspects of the empire, whether favorable or unfavorable. The harsh reality and the perception of the new republic was introduced to the natives much later. Sometimes the empire is accused not just of racism, oppression, but also of the enslavement of entire races. Yes, some races, but only some indeed, were slaves in the empire, though not universally, as in the case of the Wookiees. But authors of such criticism are accustomed to ignoring or simply do not know that the empire de facto and de jure was not a slave-owning state. Slavery, according to the decree with a cumbersome index, ASL 4557, 607.232, was legalized only for certain regions and predominantly in the Outer Rim. It was legalized and placed under state control and regulated by appropriate taxation. However, the empire permitted slavery and the slave trade only in those worlds where such forms of exploitation were socially acceptable and even a cherished tradition that had developed over many hundreds or even thousands of years. An illustrative example is the homeworld of the Twi'leks, the planet Ryloth. For that population, the slave trade was an important export commodity. If the empire had forbidden the Twi'leks from trading their kin and some other races, the Twi'leks might have rebelled. Although in the new canon they still do this. But in the old original Star Wars, it was different. By the way, there could be no question of state regulation of the slave trade and slavery in the Old Republic, which created a whole range of bureaucratic and legal issues in relations between small local states and their neighbors, as well as complicating negotiations between local governments and the central authority on Coruscant. The Old Republic throughout its history, in quotes, fought against the slave trade. Fought, thus again in quotes, selflessly, which did not hinder it at all, including because of the reluctance to provoke the popular anger of the slave-owning states that were part of it. This, in quotes, struggle of the Republic against slavery mainly was restricted to muttering in the Senate of varying degrees of volume and intricacy. Demagogy and populism are loved by all politicians, since it's not like they're hauling bags. For several millennia, there existed a legal paradox. The slave trade existed, but it was not regulated by the laws and directives of the central authority, and was not taxed. All attempts to even somewhat document this state of affairs were met with populist resistance in the Senate. Palpatine decisively cut the Gordian knot, finally systematizing this semi-legal sector of the economy. But the Empire not only documented the historical right of certain peoples and races to trade and own slaves, the Empire also itself fought against the slave trade. Yes, you heard correctly. The Empire permitted some to own and trade slaves, and prohibited it for others, for whom this phenomenon was untypical. Imperial bans significantly affected the wallets of many slave traders, even the Hutts and Zygerians, who often did business outside their domains, which was forbidden in the Empire. The presence of anti-slavery laws in the Empire is mentioned, in particular, in the Essential Atlas on page 27. Before moving on to the next topic, we would like to remind our listeners that during the ancient period of Republican history, there existed a racist regime during the reign of the Contispex dynasty. That regime lasted for nearly 1,000 years. At that time, the Republic was rife with total xenophobia, ethnic cleansings, genocides, and other joys of ancient Republican democracy, something that would hardly happen in the Empire, even in the distant future. And lastly, do not look at the galaxy far, far away through the prism of modern concepts of universal values and morality. Different world, different realities. Speaking of establishing order in the galaxy during the reign of Emperor Palpatine, one cannot fail to mention the peacekeeping activities of the Galactic Empire. Yes, there was such. Only the Empire managed to put an end to numerous local conflicts and civil wars, that it inherited from the Galactic Republic. In its time, the Republic had neither the means nor often the desire to end such local wars. The Empire, however, not only possessed the means in the form of massive armed forces, but also had the desire to establish order in its domains and the territories it claimed. We will not delve too deep into little-known corners of the extended universe, practically unknown to most. Let us focus on events you have likely heard about. The most well-known case of imperial peacekeeping is the Sepan Civil War, which raged for more than 40 years in the Sepan star system, located in the eponymous sector. Essentially, Sepan was the capital star system, and therefore had great significance for shipping throughout the sector. The Old Republic tried to ignore this conflict. In the absence of an army and navy, not counting the boys and girls from the legal department, the Republic had no means to force the sides to the negotiating table through military strength. The Senate appealed to the Jedi for help, who in turn sent 3 expeditions to Sepan. However, the only thing the Jedi achieved was a 1-month ceasefire. Then the war resumed. When the Empire turned its attention to Sepan, the warring factions had finally split into 2 fully fledged states, warring with each other. They were called Dimok and Republis. A large naval formation was sent to the conflict zone under the command of Admiral Harkov. At first, Admiral Harkov intended to resolve the matter peacefully, and the guns of his ships were to prevent both sides from taking reckless actions. The Imperial squadron succeeded in bringing the Dimok and Republis delegations to the negotiating table. The meeting took place on the planet Sepan 8, but the peace talks did not go well. Furthermore, the Rebel Alliance also got involved in the situation, as it was beneficial for them for the Sepan Civil War to continue, since it acted as a serious destabilizing factor in the entire sector, which indirectly harmed the Empire. In the future, the Alliance hoped to enlist the help of the Dimok and the Republis. In the following few weeks, an Imperial fleet consisting of several smaller squadrons significantly reduced the Dimok and Republis fleets by force, simultaneously striking at any rebels they encountered. Soon the bloodshed in the sector ceased, the rebels fled, and the Dimok and Republis were forced to sign a peace treaty. The pacification was greatly aided by an operation of the Imperial Special Forces and the elite Alpha Squadron, who captured the children of both factions' leaders and used them as leverage in the negotiations. Not very humane, but it worked. Peace and tranquility in the sector were only disrupted in the 40th year after Yavin, during the Second Galactic Civil War, when the ill-conceived policies of the Galactic Alliance, the successor of the New Republic, exacerbated old conflicts, once again igniting the flames of war, a civil war. But that's another story. A similar situation a year earlier took place in the Tarun system, located in the Ursaik sector. In the Tarun system, civil war had raged for more than 20 years. The war was also ended thanks to the intervention of Imperial diplomats and the Imperial fleet. A squadron led by a star destroyer and several escort ships arrived in Tarun. It took the Imperials just a few days to make the parties stop firing at each other. The mere presence of a powerful Imperial battleship in the system had a sobering effect on everyone. The Imperials behaved in a somewhat rude but very effective manner. The work of the Imperial fleet was completed with the assistance of 100 Imperial diplomats. As a result, both factions, Quan and Bordal, became part of the Galactic Empire and subsequently even stopped thinking about directing weapons at their system neighbors. Peace and tranquility on Tarun continued even after the Endor disaster and the beginning of the Empire's collapse. Tarun's events are mentioned in the story Steel Chronicles and the cult computer game TIE Fighter. A valuable acquisition for the Empire in Tarun were volunteers for service in the Stormtrooper Corps and the fleet. One of them was Marek Steely. At first glance, the acquisition seemed insignificant, but Marek soon played a significant role in a number of events, and even Darth Vader himself appreciated his piloting skills, calling the young man one of the best pilots in the galaxy. By the time he received the Sith compliment, Marek was leading the elite Alpha Squadron, which made the famous 181st Imperial Fighter Wing seem insignificant by comparison. Briefly about another virtue of the Empire: freedom of religion. Religious tolerance existed even in the Galactic Republic. Yes, and that is to its credit. Palpatine did not change the established order of things, thanks to which countless ordinary people continued to have unlimited access to faith. Within the Empire, there were thousands of religions. The prohibition could only be declared on beliefs that were of a destructive nature or had a distinctly political tint. However, it should be noted that the Emperor himself disapproved of religions. His only faith was the dark side of the Force. The freedom of religion is mentioned in several sources, particularly in the narratives of the Dark Forces series, detailing the fate of Kyle Katarn. Another plague inherited by the Empire from the Galactic Republic was pervasive corruption. Efforts to combat it began in the very first days of the Empire's existence, achieving significant success. Although this malady could not be fully eradicated, no one could. It is eternal, like death and taxes. An exceptional role in this matter was played by the Imperial Security Bureau. Incidentally, Colonel Yulla Ren, who became well known in the fan community with the advent of the animated series Clone Wars after the war's end, transitioned to serving in the Imperial State Security apparatus, dedicating himself fully to the struggle against bribe-takers and fraudsters occupying high offices. In conclusion, the Empire brought stability, peace, and order to the galaxy. It formed a strong vertical of power, powerful armed forces that maintained order in most parts of the galaxy and protected the states from both external and internal enemies. The Empire created a common market and a unified economic space on a galactic scale. It formed a well-structured financial system that did not collapse even after the Empire began to disintegrate. The Galactic Empire saved some races from extinction, while others it elevated to a higher level of technological development. The Empire significantly reduced the number of pirates and other criminals and fought corruption successfully. All of this, embellished by imperial mass media, was the reason for the widespread popularity of the current political model among the common population. In the second edition of the Imperial Sourcebook on page 10, it is explicitly stated that the majority of the Empire's population supported Palpatine himself and his chosen political course. The system of checks and balances worked reliably. Similar information can be found in the later encyclopedia, Heroes and Rogues. There is also analogous information in the novels of the Rogue Squadron series, set several years after the Battle of Endor. In one of them, Wedge Antilles says that only 30% of planets sympathize with the New Republic. Meanwhile, 50% unconditionally support the Empire, or rather its remnants, and dream of its revival. Even though the Emperor has long been dead, and the greedy Moffs, Grand Moffs, and other associated figures enthusiastically tear it apart. Wedge's words that the majority of the galaxy's population continues to believe in imperial ideals after the Empire's collapse is partly confirmed in another source. The Assassinal Atlas Encyclopedia on pages 10 and 16. As you understand, no matter the propaganda, without real successes in building a strong and safe state, there is no public support. However, without state errors, there are no rebel movements. In conclusion, we want to provide two excerpts from the novel Survivor's Quest. These are Mara Jade's reflections on the Empire and the New Republic. Observing and analyzing all this, Mara could not refrain from comparing it to what was left behind in the New Republic. With the eternally bubbling Senate unsuccessfully trying to resolve hundreds of disputes and conflicts between neighboring star systems, with intrigues, with factions aiming to get closer to the Coruscant feeding trough, with the Republican government wasting the state's power and resources in vain, although they could be put to much more worthy use. Palpatine was corrupt and full of hatred, especially towards the hundreds of alien races under his rule. But she could not deny that from a purely practical standpoint, the efficiency and order of the Empire were a noticeable step forward compared to the corrupt bureaucratic regime that preceded it, known as the Old Republic. One thought could not leave her mind. What could the Empire have become if, instead of Palpatine, it was ruled by people like Pelion? What level of efficiency and order could it have reached if it had fallen into the hands of someone like the non-human Thrawn? These were the thoughts in Mara Jade's head. Her train of thought can be supplemented by a dialogue from the same novel between Luke and Mara, who had already become husband and wife. Lately, it's hard to call the New Republic a model of perfect galactic governance, wouldn't you say? Mara snorted. Yes, you could put it that way delicately, she said. All these silly infightings. When we retrieved the copy of the Karmas document, I thought they would quickly subside, but half of the conflicts are still in full swing, and the Senate hasn't lifted a finger to stop them. That's not entirely true, Luke countered, but in some ways you're right. During the times of the Empire, life was much quieter, right? Until your rebellion erupted, Mara smirked. Then it became noisy again. We tried, Luke smiled. After a moment, the smile faded, and the Jedi shrugged. You can't live on unfulfilled dreams, Mara. Yes, Palpatine suppressed regional conflicts, but he also suppressed all civil liberties, especially for non-humans. If someone else had been in his place, well, we can only speculate. As you can see, even Luke Skywalker, the hero of the rebellion, partially agreed with Mara Jade. He agreed that the Empire had more order and fewer conflicts between separate worlds, and if there were any, they were quickly suppressed by the tongues of Imperial diplomats and, if that did not work, by the cannons of the Imperial fleet.